And there's something going on over there on Monday, apparently.
I hear some kind of parade and
a party or something. I mean, what is it? Talk us through it.
Yeah, people standing on the steps of the Capitol. Yeah, a huge day. I mean, it's the inauguration of President Trump as now the 47th U.S. president, after also being the 45th one. This is the moment of the actual transfer of power. And it's the last moments then of Joe Biden. And when I've been in inaugurations, it's kind of emotional because the previous president walks away, gets on a helicopter, and flies into destiny.
Wow, or somewhere. He won't really know where he's going. I don't suppose Joe Biden. You could take him anywhere and just tell him it's somewhere, and he probably wouldn't realise. And is the transition of power, and obviously, look, we've seen all the confirmation hearings in Congress over the last few days, which have been fascinating, actually. And I've got to say, Trump's picks, I think, have done an absolutely fabulous job of really kind of destroying questioning, kind of problematic questioning, attempts at kind of skewering them. They've done a fantastic job of being robust against that, all of them actually, particularly is it the Attorney General Pam Bondi? I think she was absolutely brilliant in her articulation of her point under fire, so to speak, and also the incoming Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, who's of course an ex-Fox News anchor. He made a really good account of himself. So all of these people now in place, is it the case that literally at a minute past midday on Monday, Trump's the president, Joe Biden's not anymore?
That's how it works. And by the way, on Pam Bondi, full disclosure, she and I have worked together at a Washington lobbying firm, including on a couple projects together. And she was amazing in that she was being, trying to put her on the defensive and say, isn't the justice system at risk of being weaponized against Donald Trump? And she said, wait a second.
That's already happened against
Trump. It already happened. Yeah, she was fantastic. So in any case, yeah, that's it. I mean, officially under the U.S. Constitution, that's it. Everything changes. And, people who were political appointees in the Biden administration who haven't had their jobs renewed have to leave. They have no access anymore to any of the official facilities.
And does that apply to the civil servants and such? Because in the UK, of course, the civil servants stay in place. We have what are called permanent secretaries that stay at the Treasury or the Department of Education, Department of Defence. Does everybody leave the White House?
No, some may stay for a little while. In my experience, I spent 4 years in George W. Bush's White House, and for about 6 months or so, we had a few people that were still from the Clinton administration. But Donald Trump is doing something different. And to answer your question, we don't have permanent secretaries, but we have career bureaucrats. I was a career diplomat, and so we stay always throughout, and we would get like the top 2 layers or so of the bureaucracy then would be political appointees. But Trump's doing something different at the State Department, at least. He has asked for the resignations of 3 people, relatively senior officials who are really kind of in the nuts and bolts of the bureaucratic operations, because he's going to put his own politically loyal people in those jobs. And these jobs control personnel, overall management, and the flow of information. I've never seen that before.
Wow. And are you going to the inauguration on Monday?
I'm not going to go. I will be, full disclosure, on a family ski trip.
Okay.
But I have been to plenty. I was
But you'll be applauding from Aspen.
I will be. I will be heartily. Yes.
And what do you, and I know Candice wants to ask you something, but I just want to ask you a question first. What do you think the first things that Donald Trump is going to do? I mean, literally, Monday obviously is a day of some celebration. I suspect some champagne might be drunk throughout the day and the evening on Monday by Trump, his team, and their supporters. What are the first things that he's going to sign in terms of course, executive orders that either unwind things that Joe Biden has done or indeed enact new directives? Can you give us any clue as to the top 2 or 3 things that you think he's going to attend to first?
Sure. And by the way, Trump won't drink any champagne because he doesn't drink any alcohol, but I'm sure his teams will. And there'll be balls all throughout the evening. I think right away he's going to make moves on deportation of illegal immigrants. I don't know what the text will look like, but he will, I'm sure, empower law enforcement agencies and perhaps the U.S. National Guards in various states to pursue illegal immigrants. I think he'll and deport them. He will also, I think, on day one, sign a rescinding of the asylum policies of the Biden administration that allowed migrants into the United States to claim asylum once they reach U.S. territory. Once they get asylum, it takes them a while to get a hearing to figure out whether or not they really do face a fear of persecution or physical harm if they return to their countries of origin, and then they're released into the U.S. pending a hearing that could take place years years later. I think Trump will end that right away.
Yeah.
He soon probably will again, I think, pull the U.S. Out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which Biden on day one brought the U.S. back into after Trump had pulled the U.S. out.
So kind of ripping up the whole net zero approach for the United States, which means that we shouldn't pursue it here in the UK, because if the United States, given that they are responsible for about 25% of the planet's emissions, what is, I mean, it's a sidebar here, Matthew, but what's the point in us worrying about our 1% if Donald Trump, understandably, and I think he's right, I agree with him, is going to rip up anything that ties him to a net zero target?
That's a compelling argument, and there are economists out there who make exactly that point, that countries, well, like the EU, I mean, like the UK, sorry, who contribute so little to global emissions, but are so technically capable and wealthy, ought to be developing the technologies and then investing money or providing financial aid to less well-off countries that don't have the technologies to do the energy transition.
Yeah. The other thing he seems intent on is cancelling wokeism. How's that going to work?
Yeah, well, he's kind of already done it. I mean, it's unbelievable just since the election how many U.S. Financial institutions, banks, and investment funds have already said we're quitting all the DEI, ESG, woke stuff. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to make money for them.
So this is the likes of Morgan Stanley, Matthew, who have said, look, we're not going to pursue DEI and net zero policies anymore. Of course, he's got Mark Zuckerberg on side, who was quite the antagonist, I think, as a kind of pseudo-Democrat supporter. I don't know if he ever came out publicly and said he was, but he was pretty much a Democrat supporter previously, but now he's sucking up to Trump. That's all very interesting. Let me just ask Candice, because I think, again, Candice has got her hand up at the back of the class here, Matthew, so she wants to say something. Candice.
Do you know, just on that point that you were talking about, the way things are shifting, I think political journalists now, we talk a lot about moods and vibes. And so I'm interested to know, what is the mood of the country like now with the outgoing president and the incoming one? Is there a big shift in mood? Are people sort of happy to see Trump come in? Are they sorry to see Joe Biden go? Are things just dividing along the usual partisan lines? Is there something different going on?
Yeah, it's a great and thoughtful question. So, my hardcore Democratic friends are horrified, and jokes about making sure their passports are valid so they can move to Canada. But that's a very small minority of people. Biden's approval rating is down to 33%, something like that. So the lowest it's been in his administration. So that means most Americans, whether they're Democrat or Republican, are happy to see him go. And if you think back to last midsummer, it was only, I think it was like 27% of Americans believe that he had the cognitive capacity to run for president and then do the job. So I think in general, people are relieved to see him go. There's trepidation about Trump, of course, because he's such a disruptor. But having said that, I think more Americans than expected are not just resigned to Trump taking over. They're relieved, I think, that we're not going to have a repeat of the election results being called into question as they were, 4 years ago on January 6th. But also, I think there's way more people than expected who kind of are welcoming the disruptive, okay, maybe in some ways nihilistic approach of Trump, but his disruptive way of saying, I'm not going to be bound by the political correctness or by ideological structures. I want to do what makes the most sense from a business person's perspective on a transactional basis. And I think a lot of Americans are finding that refreshing.
Do you think Trump will be more grown up? I think, he showed a lot of immaturity, I think, in his first term and in the campaign for that first term. Do you think he's learnt from that? Do you think, particularly with the people he's got around him, the people that we referenced earlier on, like Pam Bondi and so on, and of course Elon Musk and others, do you think he'll be more grown up and more credible in his second term?
Yes and no. So in terms of the campaign, much more grown up. I mean, you'll recall during the previous campaign, he made fun of handicapped people and he called Mexicans rapists. That wasn't really present in this campaign. And I think his survival of that first assassination attempt really shook him and actually made him grateful to be alive to a certain extent. And
also gave him a boost, Matthew, let's be honest.
Oh, hugely. I mean, it made him look strong. And even my friends who really despise him had to say, wow. That was pretty impressive, and he's saying fight, fight, fight. But then in terms of the nominees, some of them will be more grown up, like Secretary of State nominee Senator Marco Rubio, but some not. I mean, I think the nominee for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
You mean Hegseth?
Yeah, I do mean Hegseth, yeah.
The guy that's been accused of kind of being drunk at work and all sorts, but he's kind of shrugged that off. I thought that his confirmation hearing, I thought he was very impressive at the beginning of this week, actually. Very articulate, very prepared, and actually very down-to-earth and grounded as a veteran of the United States military. I thought he dispensed with questioning from the Democrats superbly. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into a successful tenure, I'll grant you, but I think he's had a good start, don't you?
Yeah, well, I thought that he was masterful and annoying as heck, if you're the questioner, in the way he didn't answer those questions. There was Senator Tom Kaine from Virginia was really trying to pin on him some marital infidelities, one of which he had admitted. But Hesketh kept on flipping the question, saying, well, those baseless allegations about a sexual assault case were never proven. But Kaine wasn't asking him about the assault case. Yeah. He was asking him about what Hegseth had already agreed to in terms of marital infidelity.
Yeah, but Matthew, one question he was asked very directly, which he answered very directly, was about his tattoo. Now, I don't know if you saw this. So he has a cross of Jerusalem on his chest, and a Democrat representative asked him a question about it, and I think slightly tongue-in-cheek said, you know, how do you explain the extremism, the racism almost, of that tattoo that you have on your chest? And Hegseth answered by way of saying, well, it's interesting, I was just in I think he was in a cathedral in Washington, and he said, I looked down, and in that cathedral, in our state capital, our national capital, was exactly the same cross on the floor of the cathedral. And that rather, again, shut up and dispensed the questioner, didn't it?
It sure did. It shut it right down, yes. And so he was masterful, because he's a great commentator on Fox News, masterful at that moment. The big challenge is, can he manage, the biggest organization in the world? I mean, 3 million employees with such an enormous budget. But that's, the bottom line is, I think the Senate, especially the Republicans, of course, will defer to President Trump as having a right, like any president, to choose who they want to staff him, unless there's some egregious legal problem or flaw of character.
Yeah, well, let's see. Economically, I think that many would agree that Trump's second term as 47th president could be as successful as Ronald Reagan's. That's a statement. Let's see. Matthew, as ever, thank you. We'll